Walking this Christian walk, we have to be able to know the voice of God. We have got to be able to talk to him and hear him talk to us, even when we're not able to like just sit down and just do whatever our normal ritual is to be able to hear him. And today we're going to talk about how to hear God through prayer. Welcome back to another episode of the You, Me, and Jesus podcast. We are in this series of being able to hear God. And of course, as you heard me in my intro, we're talking about being able to hear God through prayer. And I know that, like, as you're probably listening into this series, that you're like, there's some of these things you've heard before of like, because you've been in church your whole life or whatever. Some you may not be familiar with, but today I know this is the one where you're like, I know this one. I know I can pray and I know I'm supposed to be able to hear God, but I kind of want to talk you through my process, right? Because we're talking about being able to hear God through prayer. All right. So when I think about this, I think that prayer is different to different people. Okay. I am a very simple person. It's not very complex. My relationship with God is just very simple. When I went through divorce, he was literally all that I had, right? I didn't have a mother and father that was comforting me. No one lived near me that was really wanting to be there for me. I know it sounds bad, but it's the truth. Okay. And so when I was going through that time, it wasn't intentionally that I was trying to get closer to God. I was hurting and I needed help. And I was like, I don't know who can help me, but let's just see if God can be the one to do it. Even though I had been a Christian my whole life, it was like I wanted to try. So what happened was during that time, I found myself just crying out, just like speaking out loud. And because I had to just get it out, I had to get out the feelings I was having, I had to get the prayers out or whatever. And what started to happen was I started seeing like things happen. And I was so far gone, like as in like emotional, that I wasn't really tracking what was all happening per se. It wasn't until like a little bit of time later that where I was a little bit less in the chaotic form of things that I started like at some point in time, I made this decision. And the decision was that I want to get closer to God. I want to understand him. I want to be intentionally be his friend. I know it sounds deep, but I was just like, I want to try. And I was in this place where I was just like, I don't really know how to be with him, how people pray. I mean, I've seen people that put like things over their head. I've seen people that like war and like all this stuff. I've seen all that. And honestly, I was like, that's weird to me, right? For me. And I was like, I'm not that. I'm not that. That's just not me. So let me just try this. And so what my this was like, let me just treat him like he is my best friend. So I talked to my best friend about everything. I mean, everything. And so I said, well, what if I stop talking to her about everything and I start talking to him about these things, right? And I'm not saying that immediately I felt like, oh, the king of the earth is here, like thee, thou, the. I can't say that I felt that. But I was just like, I'm just gonna talk as if he's like right here. And so I just kind of started doing that. I started being like, I am hurting. I am sad. I am whatever. God, I need you to help me. I don't know what is going on. I'm so frustrated. I'm so whatever. I just started doing that. Right. And, not that I ever heard him say anything during that time initially, but it was like I was talking and I had this a little bit of faith that just said, if I can talk to him, that means he's here. So no matter how I talk to him, no matter if I'm at church or if I'm speaking in tongues, it's like no matter what way I do it, he can hear me. And that was my thing. I was like, he can hear me. So I just kind of started that way. And as the time has progressed, I still talk to him that way. But then I started developing this practice of like, let me see how I really hear him. Right. And I can't remember the process, but I know I started to journal. I was not a journaler. but I started to journal. And initially it was to get out all of my thoughts because it was like I had a lot of them, and I would just get them out. And then eventually it turned into the last page of my journal for the day. I would write down the word Jesus. And I would say, I got questions for Jesus. And then I would just pray and ask Jesus these questions. And for the most part, I didn't hear anything. Oh, I didn't feel like I was hearing anything. But I was like, let's just try this. And then what I started to do was I started going like, okay, not only am I going to ask him these questions, I'm also going to take time and I'm going to pause. I think I learned that in ministry school, right? I was in a school called Victory School of Supernatural Ministry. I think I learned that in ministry school. And so I started doing that. And lo and behold, I could hear him. And I'm not saying it was like, hello, it's time to, change your car insurance. I'm not saying that I heard him like that, like, a sign from God. This is your sign from the Lord. It wasn't like that. But I started hearing these things that I thought was him. And so I was just like, is that him? So then I would go on this journey of being like, and it wasn't like big things that I would, but it was like the smaller things. And I was just like, well, let's just try that. Like, if he's telling me to do this, let's just kind of try that, And I didn't always hear right, but that's why I did it with little things and not really big things. But then when the things were right, I was like, how did I hear that? What was the way that I heard that? Right. And that we learned that in school. And so then it was like, I heard it through, I was just somewhere and I just heard something in my spirit and was just like, what? And I paused for it because I knew I didn't give myself that thought, but it just kind of came to me. It's kind of like, you're like, oh my God, where are my keys? I can't find my keys. And you've been searching for your keys. And all of a sudden you hear they're under the living room couch. And you're like, what? But then you go and they're there and you're like, oh, good looking out. But you didn't do it because you've been trying everything else, right? So it's kind of like it was one of those things. And then what started to happen was I started just having these moments where I was like, okay, I really want to like train myself to really like legit like hear him. And so then I started going like, okay, like somebody taught me the phrase, Holy Spirit come, like Holy Spirit, just come right now. And then I started to do that. And I would just close my eyes, put my hands on my chest and just say, Holy Spirit, come. And it would be quiet. And I would wait to see if I felt something, if I heard something or whatever. Many times, nothing. But sometimes I just felt like this, like it was like an exhale, and I was like, oh, that feels really good. And then I would kind of stay there. One time I felt this presence and then all I could do was like lay back and I just couldn't even move. And it was a good presence, but I just did that. Then what started to happen, I started like feeling what I call the electric shocks. I've talked about this a lot on this podcast, where I started feeling these like electric shocks. So like I'll ask God a question and I started feeling these electric shocks. And I was like, what is these electric shocks that I'm feeling? I don't understand it. And it wasn't until I was, of course, in school and I was asking them, well, sometimes this happens. What does that mean? And most times people had no idea what I was talking about. But then it just kept happening and kept happening. And so finally I started going like, well, let's just test out this way that I think God is talking to me. I don't understand it, but let's just test it. And I started to realize that over time, that when God was saying yes to something, I would feel an electric shock. When he was saying no to something, I wouldn't feel anything, right? But when I was getting close to the answer, I would feel, okay, let me give an example. So I said recently, I'm moving out of this apartment and I'm moving to a different apartment. And I talked to God about everything, and, I want to be very mindful of the economy that we live in. I run a business. I'm a small business owner. And I'm like, okay, I'm not in fear, but I'm going to be smart. And I was like, okay, I want to get a beautiful apartment complex, very similar to this one, but less money. And so I saw this place and I loved it. And I said, okay, the rent changes, depends upon the season or whatever. And I was just like, well, let's just talk to God about it. And I was like, well, God, like, how much is the rent going to be? Is it going to be this amount? Nothing. And I was like, okay, is it going to be like this lower amount? Nothing. And so I was like, okay. And so then I just started kind of guessing. Is it going to be 2,000, 2,200, 2,250, 2,850 or whatever? And what I started to learn, I am learning in prayer, is that when it is a no, nothing happens. When it is a yes, I can feel a complete electric shock. When I am close to the answer, I can feel the presence of a yes coming. For example, what was it? Something I asked him today, okay? Because I have a cyst on my ovaries. I'm getting ready to get removed in August. And so sometimes I have pain during my cycle. And I said, God, am I going to have pain during my cycle this time? He said, yes. And I'm like, oh God, because the last time wasn't fun. And I said, okay, what level pain am I going to experience? Okay. Because I'm just preparing, And I said, I started at 10, like from a 10 to a 1. And I was like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. And then when I got to 5, like just now when I said that, I could feel like a slight, it reminds me of like water, like a slight something is happening. So not an electric shock, but like water. And I'm like, okay, here comes the yes, right? And then today when I said 4, like right now, I just said 4 and I felt the electric shock. He said 4 and I'm like, okay, 4. So that helps me prepare my mind of my pain level is going to be a 4, right? And so, but this is me training myself to hear him by just trying these little processes. Like for me, there is no book on how God speaks to me, right? So there are books that talks about ways that God speaks that we all can read that helps us to understand, but there is a way that he specifically talks to us, right? So one of the things that happens to me when I am praying for people, yes, I feel the electric shocks, but I know something is happening when I start to laugh, right? I start feeling this rumbling and I cannot control the need to laugh, right? And I'm like, okay, so I can feel it. And so then I just kind of hold on to the person a little bit more, like one hand here, one hand on their back. And I start to rumble and laughter just a little bit. And then something else, like if it gets more intense, something is happening for them. Like God is touching me, and as he touches me, it's happening to them, right? And sometimes people need freedom, like they need like joy. And so God, joy for me goes to them, right? Other times it helps them kind of break through something that is going on. And because laughter is like medicine, right? So whatever is happening with them, he uses joy to do it, right? And so I have learned and am learning to not resist that when that starts to happen. Like if it's in a quiet setting, I'm like, oh God, but most times I don't go, I'm not uncontrollable with it. You know what I mean? And I can just touch a person, right? There have been other times where I started to laugh and I needed the joy. I didn't know that I needed it, but I needed it in the environment. But I am learning how to hear him through giving myself this opportunity through prayer, right? Because it's literally just you and him. Like even if you're married, you can pray with your spouse, but you also need to spend time alone, because you need to hear how God speaks to you over how he speaks to him, her, y'all, because your relationship with God is more important than anything else on this planet. Your ability to hear him is more important than your ability to hear anybody on this planet, because we need the guidance of the one that created the whole earth, right? And so I have learned and am learning that, like, if there's anybody that I make sure that I talk to on a regular basis, it's God. I'm not saying it's always an hour, 2 hours, whatever. Sometimes it's just 15 minutes, but it's like I make sure that he is the final or the first or the end all authority in whatever it is that I'm needing or whatever, you know what I mean? But so I am learning how to hear him through prayer. And over the years, it has evolved, like I remember when I was married, I used to hear God through like fire. Like I feel fire sometimes too now, but mostly it's like the impressions. But I remember feeling wind, and I was just like, what is that wind? You know, my ex-husband saw movies. Like we would be somewhere and he would like stop. He could see like a whole movie. And I was just like, good God. You know, like I couldn't see what he saw, but he could see what he saw, the way that he hear God, you know? And so same thing goes for you. So if you want to be able to hear God and hear God through prayer, you got to spend time in prayer with him and spend time allowing him to teach you how he speaks to you in prayer. Again, it is not about your pastor, preacher, minister, elder, deacon, none of them. They're amazing. But they got their relationship with God, and you got to have your relationship with God. Because listen, I love the pastors, but they are not my end all be all. They don't know me. They don't know my relationship with God like that. My responsibility is to know that and all that. Okay. All right. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, me and all of my shenanigans with my relationship with God. But I hope that it's actually helping you. I hope that it's equipping you. Hope that it's inspiring and encouraging you to like go on this journey of like you and your relationship with God, because like nobody's perfect. Nobody's got it all the way there, and nobody's relationship with God is the same, and yours isn't either.